Hello and welcome to World Talks here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Joining us tonight is Ryhor Nizhnikau. He's a senior researcher at Finnish Institute of International Affairs to unpack the impact of the Alaska summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Trump welcomed Russian business leaders but warned that no deals will happen until the war ends and threatened economically severe consequences if talks fail. With new sanctions debated in Washington, oil prices under pressure and Russia's economy under heavy strain, we ask, what does this all mean for Moscow, for Ukraine and for Europe? Welcome, sir, to TVP World, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's a pleasure. So let's start with big picture. Your view of the meeting in Alaska, how it was conducted, and also what the outcomes were as you saw them.
We can definitely say that the Russian delegation, Vladimir Putin, received a tactical victory over Donald Trump, simply because Donald Trump once again did not impose any sanctions on Moscow. He delayed them again, and Putin once again showed that he can actually manipulate and get out of the corner in basically last moment, as he did now, and as he did actually in May of this year.
So if I understand correctly, what you're saying is that basically Trump lost everything and Putin gained everything. And so, that's the end of the story. What should Trump have gone for?
The question is, I'm not looking at it this way. I would say differently. First of all, obviously, this meeting was impossible from a perspective of ceasefire and a peace deal. We knew that this would not happen, and this did not happen. But what Putin avoided is quite important for Russia, for China, and also for India, which is Trump's ultimatum to impose severe sanctions on all of these countries. So for Putin, this is a tactical victory, which we don't know how long it will last. But he clearly showed that basically Trump's ultimatum and Trump's pressure on him doesn't really work.
Well, I mean, I'm going to ask you a question which you may or may not be able to answer, and that is, Trump was being quite aggressive. He was saying sanctions are going to be triggered and so on. He said there would be severe consequences if a peace deal wasn't made. And then he seemed to have kind of completely given over to all of Putin's demand. What happened?
I do think that he went into this meeting actually trying to avoid these severe consequences in the first place, because the question is not about putting sanctions on Russia. This is quite, I think, easily done given the trade between the countries. But it's a question about sanctions for buying Russian oil, which would definitely damage Trump's dealings with both China and India. And he really tried to avoid this. I think this is what he really wanted to do, and he did that. So in essence, I actually think that Trump, with his rhetoric, with his quite drastic statements, put himself in a difficult situation, and Putin, in essence, gave him a chance to get out of this. Because, well, we do know that Trump has now, or United States holds talks with China over trade deals and so on, and that's, I think, for Trump is equally important, even if not more important than the question of peace in Ukraine.
Okay, so let's move on then to Europe and the European response. We've seen an unusual level of unity amongst European leaders. We don't often see it when it comes to the European Union, but an unusual level of unity in support for Ukraine. How would you assess what they can do, these European leaders, along with President Zelensky, in response to what happened in Alaska?
Well, first of all, we have to say that there is no catastrophe so far. So, United States has not pulled out of the war. Trump did not say that he will stop supporting Ukraine. He might do that. It's still on the table. But so far, we are still in this type of a playing in between two poles, meaning United States and Europe and Russia. Basically, Trump is changing his opinion every day. So for Europe, the key question is try to once again reiterate all these points that Europe has been making since basically February, since this Oval Office catastrophe meeting between Trump and Zelensky. Why United States cannot agree to main points that Putin is pressing onto Ukraine. And I think this is what Europe will be doing. And most likely, at this point, I would say that Trump will say that the meeting went fine and that he will need to have another meeting with Putin, or maybe Putin, Zelensky himself.
Yes, but I mean, how much influence do you think these European leaders will have? I mean, because the message hasn't fundamentally changed, as you say, since February. And yet it seems, Trump seems oblivious to it. How much influence are they going to have this time when they go to Washington tomorrow?
You're totally right. And I think this is terribly denting U.S. and specifically Trump's credibility, that he changes his mind every day or twice a day. I think that most likely we will see not really a question of influence, but rather that how Trump wants to use certain messages and certain meetings actually to frame his own position and his own perception of how Trump behaves. So I think what he will do is that he will say, and I'm not saying this will happen right now, but he will say that, well, I heard now Ukrainians and Europeans, I heard Russians, and I think there are points of disagreement. That's why they have to meet. So this is what Trump will do. I think what Trump is doing, he is step by step distancing himself from the war. He don't want to be anymore the supporter of Ukraine. He wants to be he wants to distance himself from this war, and at some point be able to say that I've done everything. Ukrainians can't compromise, Russians can't compromise, so it's no longer my problem. That's the danger to me.
Well, it's not something that's going to be easy to do, and I'm thinking in particular in terms of NATO, because all these European countries are members of NATO, and the US does have obligations under Article 5 and others towards any attack on these countries. He's not going to be able to simply wash his hands of the whole thing, because there is a threat to NATO countries even now, with hybrid warfare being exerted upon them by Russia.
I agree, but that's the question is right now that there is no, in Trump's view, direct danger to Europe. So he has no obligations and commitments to Ukraine. So for him, he steps aside from Ukraine, and what he can do for Europe is a different story. And I think that he will be probably keeping his word on this NATO summit that we just had in The Hague. Europeans pay, Americans protect. So that's how Trump will see. But from Ukraine, he really wants to move away, and that's to me a danger. That's why he is to a certain degree dancing between Putin, Europeans all this time.
Okay, well, talking about security, Steve Witkoff, Trump's special envoy, says that Russia has agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine similar to NATO's Article 5. Does that surprise you?
Yes, because that's totally impossible. And that's something that Russia will never agree. And we actually heard from Russian side that they agree to security guarantees which are linked to China. So Russia wants a type of a Budapest memorandum, not Article 5 type of agreement, type of security guarantees.
Okay, well, this is what, of course, the European Union leaders and Zelensky are pushing for. Now, if there is some kind of security guarantee that is similar to Article 5. What about being able to rely on Trump to reinforce that guarantee? Or enforce that guarantee?
Well, then the question to me is very simple. The question is then why, for all this time, we have been hearing from Washington that Ukraine cannot be the member of NATO, because then Article 5 should be offered to Ukraine. So, and also at the same time from Moscow all this time that the war, one of the core reasons of the war is that Ukraine wants to join NATO. So we do see here a logical fallacy. So to me, the question is that Steve Witkoff is not sincere in this statement, and he just wants to publicly reassure or say something that doesn't exist in reality. Unfortunately, and that's the problem for Ukraine, Ukraine has been knocking on NATO door since at least 2022. I'm not saying even before that, for a long time, for a few years at least. And NATO is deliberately saying no because of Article 5 provisions that they would need to offer this to Ukraine security guarantees in case of Russian attack. So it's impossible.
Okay. And then last couple of minutes that we have left, there has been a build-up in the last few months of Russian military assets on the border with Finland. What do you read into that? So
far, in the short term, there is no danger. But I'm seeing it in a very simple way. Russians have a good memory, and they do remember all especially they remember the betrayals, and they consider Finland's joining NATO as a betrayal. So what they do is they actually do pose a longer-term risk to Finland, but that would only depend on how the war in Ukraine will end. So as long as the war in Ukraine continues, Russia has no capabilities to threaten Finland.
Yes, well, Finland is a member of NATO, and so, that should trigger Article 5. But as you say, let's wait and see what happens. Thank you so much for sharing your analysis with our audience. Have a good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Don't go away, there are lots more coming up. Goodbye.